This is Laserlight Presents All About the Gig. And we're back. Part 2, Choosing the Right Gear. Dave, Devin, welcome back.
Good to be back.
I know.
I like the
Do you guys
preamble,
ever leave?
yeah.
I mean, really, everyone that's listening is like, okay, wait a minute. He keeps saying welcome back. What does that mean? All right, no, we want to dive back into choosing the right gear. And we're correlating this with the beginner, mid, and advanced segments of any artist in where they are with personal space, gigging out, and things that they're thinking about getting maybe just for fun. Okay. So let's circle back. Okay. Places to shop. We hit that. Used versus new gear. We hit some of that. And we may hit more on that because I always find that very interesting. Care for your gear. Touched a little bit on that. And transporting your gear, which I've always been astonished, especially after speaking to these two guys on on what they do and don't do, as opposed to my OCD.
we could stand to be a little bit more gentle with our stuff.
I mean, you guys have blown my minds. In the middle of winter, we'll be working here, and I look in their trunks, and I'm like, "Do you guys need any firewood?" And they're like, "Well, we'd love some, but."
We got amps.
Yeah. I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Got amps and PA gear in the back there.
All right. Something we may or may not have at least scraped the surface on was that I just love this topic: volume, amp versus your gear and or rig.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna touch on that, but guys, let's kind of pick up with. I think we were wandering around. We got through the beginner stage, wandering around the mid stage, touched on a little bit of advanced. So, choosing the right gear. Like today, let's just start with this. So today I was asking Devin. I said, "Hey, Devin, I want to create a short board, some sort of mini pull out whenever we need it, whether it's in studio or." Out gigging, which I want to circle back to that because I have a great idea for that. A mini board, okay? And we wanted to keep it broad and tight, if you will, at the same time. And I asked Devin, I said, I'm looking for, $400 electric guitar amp. I'm looking to build a mini board with a tuner, a wah, a jazz/blues combination pedal, accompanied with a rock/metal pedal. What were some of the things you were looking at and why, Devin?
I mean, first things I was looking at is just trying to see like what kind of amps we can get, maybe new, only because of the way the studio operates, and especially with wanting to be able to have warranties on things. It's maybe a little different than I would be talking to someone if they're looking for like their first amp or something.
Staple that they're gonna
because we're performing a different job than maybe someone else would be, but at the same time it's kind of the same category. I'm looking for something that will take pedals well, something probably in the sub 20 watt category. I'm still looking at tube amps if I can make it happen, but if we can't make it happen, there's a lot of good modeling choices and such, especially for something that isn't going to be left in a trunk in the middle of winter. Something that's going to stay in a studio and not be thrown around. I might be more willing to buy something that's
sub 20 watt tube watts, right?
I very much mean tube amps, which is very important to say, by the way, because I learned right at the beginning of high school that my 120 watt solid state amp couldn't keep up with my 15 watt Blues Junior. So yeah, tube watts are not solid state watt. So that's always a big thing to keep in consideration.
Okay. So what were you kind of fishing for? What did you settle on, or what was popping up back at you?
Yeah, well, so we're frank with the audience. I only searched about 10 minutes for amps. There's an amp I had in mind. We were looking at some Bugeras. And, nice. Bugera is another one of those companies that it's kind of like the Behringer of amplifiers and guitar equipment, kind of like how Behringer was for audio equipment, where in the past, they've sometimes gotten a bit of a knack for being some cheaper Chinese-made stuff. But at the same time, their quality has risen over the past decade, as well as if it's not something that you're going to beat on all the time, then it
Sure.
might be a great piece of equipment, especially because they kind of unabashedly clone a lot of other people's circuits. So like the amp that we were looking at was like a BC30, which is like an AC30 clone, and it's a pretty straight ripoff. And there's a lot of people who will buy amps like this even when they have the professional equivalent, because the idea is the professional equivalent might stay in their van or stay in the car or stay in their road case, or it's on the road all the time or at their practice space, or they want an amp to leave at the practice space that's like their other A-class amp. So it's not even just about beginners sometimes, being able to get these tones at a lower cost point, knowing that this isn't a piece of equipment that you're going to beat around.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. In the same class or category, what have you experienced, Dave, that might be a relevant search? So had I come to you and said, Dave, I'd like to have an auxiliary station staged for a bass player. And maybe that doesn't consist of pedals. Maybe that consists of all that coin going into some sort of respectable, boostable, boastable bass amp. Where would you start?
With bass?
$400.
$400. Okay. Well, for $400, you can get a decent head. I'm partial to some of the older Mark bass stuff. I do like Mark bass. They've recently gone through a merger, and I'm a little bit unsure exactly where the quality is with the newest products, but when they were all designed in Italy and made in Italy, I really enjoy the way those sound. So for $400, you can get kind of your pick of the litter with old bass heads. So if you wanted a tube head, they have those. If you wanted a solid state head, they have those. They have modeling heads. So for $400, you kind of have some good options to pick from. And if you have a cabinet that is already, ready to go, you could have a lot of different sounds right there, because I know you have a very nice Aguilar head here, which Aguilar is an amazing company. If you wanted to find something that is almost the antithesis of that, you could go for maybe like a Mark Bass Tube 800, or if you wanted to kind of model some of the older like flip tops, or if you wanted to model like the old SVT blue lines, there's a ton of really decent modeling amplifiers out there that is made in the bass realm too.
Yeah. All right.
And to add,
go ahead.
I was going to say, to add with that, because I know Dave just gave some context for what's at the studio already. Part of the reason for the choice I was talking about before was I was leaning into things that what some guitar players would call a voxy flavor, because of the fact that we already have an orange here at the studio, which is, for all intents and purposes, a modded Marshall kind of sound. And then we have a Fender Blues DeVille here, which for all intents and purposes can do sort of the Fender Blackface clean thing, but also has a little bit of that Bassman tone stack in it, which was common in the Hot Rod series, but still in the Fender family. So it's like, if you're going to have the three major food groups, not including like the super modern metal things, but the three classic food groups, I was like, okay, this is a piece that we don't have yet. So looking into what are my budget Vox flavors, like can we get an AC10 or AC15 that might push us out of budget? So who makes good clones of those circuits, or who does similar ideas? Dig it.
Dave, back to you real quick.
Sure.
So you said bass head, which is the Aguilera.
Yeah, the Aguilar's, that is indeed a bass head, so it needs the cabinet to function.
Now you spoke to cabinet as well, but to the core root of what I'm asking for $400, what would be the singular purpose purchase, right? So I want something that's all in one.
Okay, so
to do
so
this.
We're assuming that we don't have another rig. Okay.
Correct.
So if we're looking at the $400 mark when it comes to combo amps, Ampeg has a few decent modern kind of practice amps.
There we go.
Unfortunately, for $400, you're kind of pressed up against a wall, at least in my personal opinion, when it comes to bass rigs.
Okay.
What's your feeling on like the frontmans? I know a lot of beginner bass guys who get those.
Like the Fenders?
Yeah, the really light ones with the neodymium speaker and everything.
Yeah, I don't hate them. They've actually gotten a lot better in recent years. Because like those the frontmans and in the bass realm they call them the Rumbles, the Rumble series. Those ones, they used to be kind of sketchy. I actually, one of my first bass amp ever that lives in my practice room now because the speaker's half blown, and if I turn it up half past noon, it starts to kind of growl at me.
I got you.
Is a Fender Rumble 60, and this was like a mid 2000s era Fender Rumble series, and those were pretty notorious for being kind of subpar. And it's a big 15-inch speaker; it should be able to push, and it can't. Nowadays, they've actually gotten a lot better with them. They've redesigned them. They're actually great little starter amps. Is it going to give you enough stage volume? No, probably not. But as far as like practicing and, just jamming in a little bit of a quieter space, it will definitely be able to keep up with that. And I would imagine if you start looking at like the Rumble 125s and the Rumble 200s and stuff like that, you'll start to be able to keep up with practice situations. And then at that point, if you have a line out, you can just run that to the mains, and it could be a gigging amp. I just find them to be a little bit lacking.
What is? Say it again.
That particular series I find to be a little bit lacking.
What series?
The Rumble series, the Fender Rumble series.
Okay.
They just kind of seem to me like they were always meant to be more of a practice series, and now they're starting to try and be competing with the gigging series.
Oh.
And like a lot of people are like, well, people don't necessarily think Fender amplification when it comes to bass.
Yeah.
People are thinking, your staples. You're thinking of your Aguilar. You're thinking of Mark bass. You're thinking of, some people swear by Hartkey. Not so much. I don't think I've ever met somebody that like brings out a Fender and they're specific. I mean, I'm sure they exist. And if there's anybody out here that is a avid Fender bass amp lover, please direct me, because I might be a little bit ignorant in that area. So,
I've seen guys who like their cabs, not their heads. Like, I know a couple people who are adamant about an old 610 cab or something by Fender, but like,
sure,
I can't
if you get
think
into
of
the
any
vintage era.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone who's actually using any old heads though, really.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that real quick, right? So we're always, here in the now and what we're speaking to. We love to speak to the advanced, and we love to speak to the people who are well entrenched and on their way. But I just can't help to always want to speak to the people who are, should I do this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this what I want to do? And I just got this Matchbox, whatever, and I think I want to go somewhere more with it. Now what do I do? So I will ask questions like this from both of you. Take a turn.
Sure.
What's a cabinet? What's a cabinet with a head? What does that mean?
So a cabinet.
So from the base, Dave Cirilli.
Well, actually,
Dave Cirilli.
This answer.
If you haven't heard, his name is Dave Cirilli.
Yes, indeed. Well, this answer is actually it applies to both bass and guitar. Your cabinet is quite literally just your speaker enclosure. Without some sort of power amplifier pumping into it, it won't actually do anything. It's just your speakers. It's your speakers that have some sort of way to be able to take in the sound. The head is the actual thing that you're plugging into. That contains your preamp, your EQ, your power amp section, all the stuff that makes it run. So kind of think of it like this. In terms of cars, your head is like your motor, and all the wheels and the chassis is your speaker cabinet. The motor powers the rest of it. So you need to have that. And when we say combo amps, a combo amp has both of them built together, such as the DeVille or the Orange.
A combo amp. Okay.
A combo amp has them both together. So the head is actually built into the amp to be one combination thing to take with you, which is very standard. Most, a lot of amps do that, but some, for the versatility, such as like we have the Mark bass cabinet.
I was going to say, so we have a cabinet.
We have a Mark bass cabinet and an Aguilar head.
Okay.
So that's where you can like mix and match them like that. And you can mix and match combo heads, but they have to be very specific dimensions to be able to slide it in and retrofit it perfectly.
So when you were speaking earlier to what would be a $400 accent piece for an additional bass corner, an additional bass accompaniment, the $400 would get you where? You'd have to get a combo.
You
for
would,
sure.
yeah.
That's what an Ampeg.
Yeah, if you wanted.
Type.
Well, Ampegs do make cabinets and heads separately as well.
But if I needed the combo for budgetary constraints, what would be a bass combo, right?
Yeah,
Bass amp combo.
they do make, Ampeg does make entry-level things around the $400 mark that could keep up with a band. And
really?
that would be totally fine.
Huh.
I just don't find them super gig ready. They just don't feel as solid to me as, and maybe that's just because I've become so used to what I like at this point.
Gig ready. What does that mean? Gig ready.
It's, if something has any chance that it will fail, or if there's, a lot of people are saying
gig reliable.
Yeah,
gig ready.
Yeah,
AKA
reliable.
Gig reliable.
And,
yeah.
Can produce the sounds that you want without you having to fiddle with it every single time. One of the things I hate to feel on stage is feeling like I constantly cannot dial in my tone. Yeah. And some rooms are like that. There's rooms where you go and it's just boomy or it's just this or that. And you just feel like you can't quite dial in your tone. Yeah. And it's this like nagging feeling the whole night of like, it's so close, but I can't. Sure. I just don't feel like I sound good, and like it probably sounds fine to the audience, but you're just annoyed by it all night.
Oh, I gotcha. Devin, a cabinet for electrical. You wouldn't need a cabinet and head for acoustic.
I mean, they do it.
Do they really?
Yeah, they do. I think it's a little silly. But especially going back to electric, your main reasons for going either combo or a cab and a head, one of the big reasons is because you almost never, there's been a couple exceptions over the years, but you basically never get a closed back cabinet with a combo. All combos are typically open back cabinets, and a huge differentiating in guitar tones is the open back versus closed back sound. So you think of, I know there's also more speakers in it, but for all intents and purposes, think of like big Fender twin clean, 212s at 100 watts basically, but open back versus say even a Marshall when it's clean with a closed 412. Those are very different sounds because you get very different low end and bass responses especially, and also closed back cabinets tend to beam sound and per watt can push sound forward more than an open back, where an open back will fill a room up because the sound's coming out of both sides of the amp. Because just as much sound goes backwards as it does forward.
Didn't even think of that.
And then that reverberates around the room. And sometimes it can kind of create a better stage sound because maybe it disperses more. Yeah. So it can kind of fill the stage and everyone can hear you. The other big reason for going cab versus combo for guitarists is normally combo means I like this amp exactly how it is, and I will never carry it around in a different configuration. However, having a head could mean, hey, I love this head, and maybe even better yet, this head has multiple power sections, so maybe it runs at 150 and 25 watts, or 60 and 30, or 30 and 15, or maybe it has a 5-watt mode, and that means that I could bring it out for a big stage gig with a 412. And then I could do a smaller club date with a 212 or 112, and then I could take it home and put it in 5-watt mode and run it through a 110. And in all those situations, I'm giving those speakers the power they asked for, but I'm also doing it in a way that is relevant to where I am in the room. And some people will do this as well because they might just find that they love a speaker cabinet in a combination, but what they do is they get multiple heads, and they bring one head out for the hot like rock gig, and they bring another head out for kind of the country thing.
Wow.
And they'll bring
as long as their cabinet has that.
Yeah. So they like the way
versatility.
Yeah, they like the way that cabinet sounds, and they just really like those speakers. And speakers is such a rabbit hole that a lot of guys find a speaker and a combo that they like, and they're just like, that's it. That 212 is mine. That 112 is mine. And then they'll buy heads for different like flavors basically and plug it into that combo. I mean, sorry, cabinet.
Yep. So I'm shopping, and I have to consider whether my gear is going to project the sound on its own based on the venue. And I also have to consider if my gear is mic up appropriate or best suited for, right? Because we have to be speaking, right? If I'm hearing you guys, there are two atypical gigs. You're either going to use a PA system or spatially you're going to project yourself. Right? Is there really a difference? I mean, should you really be shopping for space projection, which then covers the base of, oh, cool, they have their own PA system and I can just mic up.
I would never say this as like an insult to anyone, but I would say probably 90% of the people who would be hearing this, what I would say is get whatever your number one is going to be and something that is micable in most situations, because the whole idea of projecting to the back of the room or doing those things, it's like that might be rig number 2, or that might be when you can afford to start diversifying, where most people are still working on rig number 1. So it's a bit of a luxury to be able to start like thinking about those multiple rigs and multiple venues and such.
So start. What do you think, Dave? Same thing.
I fully agree.
Start with the sweet spot sound.
Yeah. Start with what's going to be an amp that can do it all. Just because it might be a little bit silly to lug a Fender Twin to a jazz gig, if that's what you need to do, that can do it, because it can get real low and it can get loud enough to fill a stadium stage. Like, it can do it all. So get something that can do it all first, and then start to expand once you have the budget for it.
Make sure you can play with a drummer, but you don't necessarily have to go straight for the Twin. But you should,
Right.
Don't get like a 10-watt amp that as soon as the drummer starts laying into it, like you'll be buried. Like, make sure that you could keep up with the drummer, and then make sure it can be mic'd well.
Now, I will say this for
Keep
bass.
up in the sense of projection through a PA, you should be able to fill the space, fill the void.
You should be able to compete with the acoustic sound of the drums with your amp.
Sonically, yeah.
With
it's not saying you need to, but you should be able
Yeah.
to.
Okay.
Yeah, you should at least still be able to hear it. So if you're buying like a Fender Champion 10 or something like that, that's like, a little tiny little
1.8 speaker.
Yeah, 1.8 speaker. That's quite literally meant to go on your desk and be a practice amp.
Yeah.
That's not going to keep up with a drummer. It can't. It simply cannot. But I will say this much. As far as that goes for guitar, bass works differently. In today's day and age, bass is always DI'd through a PA system, which is direct input, meaning you do not mic up bass cabs almost ever anymore. There's some old school sound guys that might still stick like a kick drum mic, or they might still stick like a really low frequency response mic in front of the bass cab. But 9.9 times out of 10 at this point, they will DI you. So
I've never seen it done outside the studio.
Yeah,
For live application, I've never seen it.
I don't. Yeah, I've actually personally never been on a stage
There you go.
where they've mic'd me. It's always been DI. So I will say, when you're buying a bass cab, listen to the DI out. Find a speaker, turn off, your the in cabinet speaker, and listen to it through a PA speaker.
How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that at a local chain store when you're shopping, or a private store, boutique store? How are you going to do that? You're going to walk in and you go, I really need to hear this through a DI setup. How do you request that when you're shopping?
The easiest way is to take the amp and take it over to their live audio section.
Okay.
Walk it over there.
Yeah, just walk it over there.
Or say to someone, if that doesn't exist.
Or say, I would like to play this through a PA speaker because I would like to hear how this DI sounds.
Cool.
I want to make sure that it sounds good.
Because that's how 90% of people are going to hear you.
Yep. Yeah. You hear yourself.
Now you're shopping. Correct.
Yeah, you hear yourself through the stage volume, but it doesn't matter how your speakers are colored. It's going to be all about that DI. And the nice thing is, like the amp that I have, I can choose to have the DI happen before or after the preamp section. So it can be a true DI where it's bass, send to front of house, then sent to my amp. Or I can have it be bass, sent through my amp's preamp section, then sent to front of house. So if there's a specific tone that I'm like, no, I understand. I'm giving you.
Which one conveys the best? Yeah.
Well, sometimes sound guys, if you're running like a festival stage or something, they're like, no, we need a clean signal. You cannot color your signal at all because we need to have full control over it. But sometimes if you're playing at a club or a venue, like this past weekend we just played in Put-in-Bay, and they have a really nice sound system and stuff, and he'll just take whatever you give him. He's like, I want you to have your sound, and then I'm going to mix volume and worry about, making sure bass tones don't swell up in the back of the room and stuff
and just
like that.
a reminder, if a place has at least B+ or better system, they usually have a B+ or better sound tech.
Oh yeah, no, this guy's
accompany it.
Yeah, this guy's.
Devin's like,
it depends. It depends. Well,
I don't know.
This place has a phenomenal sound guide. It's like state of the art.
Yeah.
He's got an X32.
By the way, did you, circling back to some of the previous casts, did you poke around and find out? Did you ask those exploratory questions? Where are we playing? What do they have? Is someone going to be there to operate what they have?
Well, we've already played here, so we kind of knew. But the nice thing is,
but there was a point where you never did. Did
Yeah.
anyone bother to ask, or what would you advise people who are embarking on such an opportunity? And the venue owner's
Yeah.
like, oh, we've got the this and this and this and that.
At a place like that, for anybody that's listening, this is Put-in-Bay, Ohio, which is a notorious party city
Sure.
in Ohio.
Sure.
A place like that, there is music there all day, every day throughout the summer, starting from April 15th all the way through October 15th.
I'm with you.
So we're trusting in the fact that they are such a tourism-driven business that they will indeed be able to meet demand.
It's a big gamble. I mean, I'm with you. For me, it's okay. Dave's manager's calling him. I know, no. No, actually, that's Devin's. No. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's their record label. I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's okay, man. Take the call. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. You wanna trust in the fact.
Yeah. And if the reputation precedes
I'm
them,
always again trying to make sure that the new embarkers, right, are just they're checking the boxes because that's how they learn.
Oh yeah. Make sure you ask your questions. But if a place is paying you a certain dollar amount, and I'm not going to say what it is, but if a place is paying you a certain dollar amount, there becomes a certain level of trust. If they say we got sound and we're paying you X amount, if they are,
you're thinking their investment is definitely including them not looking like ass clowns by not having someone to dial it in.
Yeah, if they're forking over enough money to make that worth it, they probably have their ducks in a row because this is now a multi-million-dollar business that is relying on music to generate bar sales.
Yeah, love it. Devin.
Not to mention at that point, you're also assuming that there's nothing you can say that would make them change their business model. So you're also kind of suck it up and deal with whatever they're going to give us, which is part of the deal too.
Sure.
To go along with that for bass players though and guitar players is just like how Dave was saying, check out the DI sound when you go somewhere. If you even own the most basic of recording rigs and have something you can record onto, get a 57 or a cheap diaphragm microphone and start finding out where you want to mic up your amp, because you will probably not be able to bring a fancy microphone to a lot of venues. Most sound guys are going to just stick whatever they have in there. Probably a 57, maybe it's a Sennheiser 609, 906, maybe it's a Baby 57, maybe it's an Audix or some other mic. Doesn't matter. They're all in the same flavor for the most part. They're not going to set you up with a Royer 121 and a large diaphragm. This isn't like Abbey Road.
Right.
They're going to stick a diaphragm in front of your guitar cab. So do that at home and find out, where do you like that mic? Do you like it dead on the cone? Do you like it at the edge of the cone? Do you like making an equilateral triangle with that? Do you like to have the mic off axis, which means you point it slightly off the cab at 45? Do all those things and record an idea, or better yet, set up a loop and move the microphone while you know what you're doing, and go back and listen to that and find out what A, you think just sounds best, or B, what sounds the most accurate to what you were hearing in the room. I tend to lean towards the second one because I want to know that whatever I'm developing on stage is hopefully same as what's going out front. I'm not trying to polish it more than that. I want to be the same. However, you would be welcome to go the other way and say, well, actually, it's much more flattering when I do this. But nonetheless, know where you should be placing that microphone, because, most sound guys will kind of begrudgingly take a microphone if I say I want to use it. But what they will never do is if I say this is where the microphone goes, they're like, it's your amp, whatever, man.
Nice.
They don't mind about that. I can place the microphone.
I have been right, even in here. You know how many times these amp mics have changed direction, point of purpose, the whole thing.
Oh yeah, and some guys get really
Love it.
persnickety on that. They'll do it song by song.
Sure.
Some guys get really into that. They're like, if you want this Led Zeppelin song from this album, you're gonna do right on the cone with this microphone.
Yeah.
People get into that.
Okay, let's circle back real quick to something that I mentioned earlier: watts versus room for your amps. Thoughts on that, Devin?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest things is depending on what kind of band do I have, and also am I the one running sound. So for a lot of scenarios where I'm running my own sound, I typically am primarily only putting vocals through the system and then hints of other things when needed, but mostly for vocals. And I'm telling the rest of the band to modulate yourself in your volume based on how the band feels. If the drummer picks up, you pick up. If people come down and the vocalist gets really intimate, you all come down. Mix yourself with what you're hearing on stage. And in those situations, obviously bigger room, bigger amp, smaller room, smaller amp. That part's pretty easy to go. What I will say is kind of bottom line for guitar players often, especially...
how do you get that versatile, right?
If you're miking it, you're probably never going to go below 15 watts-ish.
Okay.
And the only thing I would say is the exception of that is like a Princeton, which Princeton reverbs are famously used by a lot of big players, including people like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who literally still did stadiums with 2 Princetons, like for their main guitar players. But they mic'd them, everything. But they did like small amps cranked loud kind of thing. So, if you mic it, you don't really need anything bigger than that. It can technically keep up with the drummer. And if you mic it and use monitors to your advantage, that's a sound thing that you can do.
Yeah.
And then, you're probably topping off with like a half stack or a twin. That's where you're topping off in terms of volume for most modern people. Unless you get to be Joe Bonamassa and have like
twin.
A row of,
Well, let's explain that though. Half stack and twin. What do those two mean? What is that?
So those are two of probably the most
Half
common
stack, what's that
backline amps. So a half stack would be a 4x12, so 4 12-inch speakers in a closed cabinet with probably a Marshall or a Marshall style amp on top. So that's one sound. That's the sound of rock and roll. It's the sound of the 80s.
Head, you mean?
Yeah, a head and a 412.
Okay.
So that's a very, very common configuration. Much less common nowadays. In fact, pretty much since the 90s, that's been on a pretty big decline. You don't really see half stacks anymore. And you certainly don't see full stacks anymore, which is 2 4x12 cabinets, one stacked on top of the other.
Well, that's just depressing.
You're wondering what that is.
Think of the wall of cabinets from AC/DC.
I mean, I lost my hearing for nothing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
And for everyone who's pining for the glory days of all that stuff, one, remember that nearly all those people lost significant amounts of their hearing because you don't realize how loud that is.
Which is because they now need it to even
and two,
participate.
When those amplifiers were introduced, part of the reason was because PA systems could not keep up and put everything through them. So when you played a stadium of 5,000 people, the only way they would hear you is if you brought huge amplifiers with lots of speakers. Because every time you double the speaker amount, you double the supposed volume. So going from a 112 to a 212, you're pushing twice as much air. You get a doubling in volume per C volume. A 412 to 2 412s, you are doubling that. So every time they would add speakers, they're adding how much air could be moved, which gave you the perceived difference of doubling the volume over and over again. So nowadays, with modern PA systems and such, there's no real reason to have those kind of deafening sounds on stage unless you're going for a very specific thing, normally an emulation of someone from the past, or because you're one of those people still gigging.
And keep in mind, too, that became smoke and mirrors towards the end. As the PAs caught up to it, they were expected to have that look, and they had a bunch of dummy cabs that weren't plugged in. They didn't have anything in them. They were basically cardboard boxes. I know someone in town who used to run backline. He has a whole barn full of fake Marshall cabinets.
Oh my God!
Because it's the look.
See, you heard it here first or
it's
last,
the look,
man.
Now, when it comes to bass
I feel
wattage,
violated.
There's a lot of industry secrets that are somewhat sad to learn. That's one of them.
Jeez. Well, we won't depress you with too much, but that's one insider insight.
If you only want to be slightly more depressed, there's a lot of those people that did that. And then the amp that was actually mic'd up was like a Fender Champ backstage or something like that.
It wasn't even,
oh my God. This rabbit hole is horrible. Nice, Devin.
Now,
wait, Dave, real quick though.
Sure, yeah.
I want to really press upon the point. See, watts versus room.
Yeah. Watts, bass wattage.
Boom.
Now, There is a soft rule that was told to me a very long time ago that I have found holds actually very, very true. And I don't even know if this is like an industry thing. It was just told to me by one of the old guards in town, and this guy's teacher, mentor, a really, really solid player. So I've taken it at face value, and it seemed to hold true ever since. A bass needs whatever the guitar's total wattage is times 2. So if you have one guitar player that is playing with a solid state 100 watt cab, you would need 200 watts to be able to keep up with it.
Ooh.
Because the bass...
So there's some ratio work, right?
The bass requires more energy to push the low frequency. To be able to get that same volume at a low frequency, it requires more power. So it's quite simply... now, the math gets weird when you start introducing tubes versus solid state and this and that. I have found that I have never needed to max out my 500 watt bass amp. I have it's not a big amplifier. It's a 112 cabinet, and I can run an extension cab to make it a 212 cabinet. But 500 watts has always treated me well. I've never needed to max that out, but I've probably been, pushing it in the 70th to 80th percentile, like actually starting to push it a little bit, but I've never had to fully max it out. And I think that's because I've never had, 250 watts of guitar on stage pushing at full volume before.
Yeah.
But that's
not even have put that parallel together, man. Very cool insight.
That's something that I've always seen to basically hold true. And the nice thing is too, with amps like that, when it has the ability to push 500 watts, you can then line up extension cabinets and stuff like that. So this is where you become a much more versatile gear buyer. Yeah. Is you start with your combo amp, and it's a good combo amp, and then it has the ability to run the same brand's extension. Perfect. And then it still has a DI. Now you can go through the mains. So now that's 3 different configurations that you could theoretically run. And the other thing
that's versatility, man.
Very versatile. And what a lot of bass players are doing more and more is they're finding their favorite DI box or their favorite DI pedal, and they're going to a gig with that. And that's it. No amp, no nothing. They just walk in with their little DI thing that they've liked. And because just about anywhere you're going at this point is going to have mains. So if you know what you want your sound to color like, you just be like, here's my line out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, guys. We're coming to a close here. As usual, we could go, but we've got a killer rhythm and a flow session about to start. So to our listeners, we need to do a rap. Okay. I have a note here, and this is an interesting new segment, and I'm going to start throwing these guys some sidewinders, some knuckleballs. First thing that comes to your mind could be anything, off topic of what we talked about today, on topic, whatever. First thing that comes to your mind, Devin. Best way to? ?
Ooh. So best way, I'll say this, best way to find appropriate sound for a venue. I'll go with that. It's kind of on topic, but goes with it, especially in terms of wattage. Know your gain structure from your pedals, know your gain structure from your amp, as in if it's a master volume, you've already worked out where you like that for the most part. Then what I normally do is I find my loudest sound that I would probably ever do that night.
Yeah.
I wait for the drummer to do their sound check, and I listen to a really good snare crack, and I'll bleed in like a kind of a ripping guitar kind of lead sound real quick, and just try and sort of match that sound. And then I'll roll everything back from my amp and find out where the master was. Was I a little loud? I'll pull back the master. Was I a little soft? I'll pull it up, because I'm assuming I've done enough homework for all the in-between jumps in volume, but I need to find out what am I choosing to be my top volume, and I'll wait to hear the drummer really get to play for a second in a sound check.
Wow, killer. Dave, you don't get the same question. I saw you were like, okay, I got this. So, most important way to not ?
So still keeping with the same topic, the most important way to not have a different stage sound than an audience sound is to make sure your cable is at least the length in feet of whatever your biggest speaker size is.
Ooh,
so they
check
say
that out.
roughly, and it's not exact, but roughly, if you have a 10-inch speaker, you are going to hear what that truly sounds like to an audience at 10 feet. If you have a 12-inch
Wow.
speaker, 12 feet. And for
Dude.
bass players, 15. A lot of bass players will bring out 15-inch speakers.
Yeah.
So you need at least a 15-inch cord. And, if you get there a little bit early before everybody is ready to go and you kind of set up and you step back 12 feet, if you have a 12-inch speaker, you'll actually realize that the way you sound on stage is very different than the way they're hearing it. And when you're right up next to your amp, you might be losing out on certain frequencies. You might be losing out on some of the high end. You might not hear some of the way that the low end is responding in the room. But as you get further and further away, you can actually make sure that you are not fundamentally having a bad front of house sound, even though you have a good stage sound.
And tell me if I'm
Wow.
wrong, Dave. This is one of the reasons why I'm often hesitant to tell other guitar players and even some bass players to use 15-inch speakers, is because of the fact that I'm like, how many times do you actually get to be 15 away from your cabinet?
Yeah, that is a little bit of a
wait,
concern.
wait. I'm sorry. So for clarity,
Mhm.
you're speaking to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
your self distance,
Mm-hmm.
personal distance. Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, in my mind, I went right away.
And there's
to
actually
audience versus
there is actually a myth, and there is people that would fight me tooth and nail on this, but this is actually physics. This is true, honest to God physics.
Yeah.
People will argue that a 15-inch speaker by nature is warmer because it's a bigger speaker. It's not. The warmth that comes from a 15-inch speaker is no different than a 10-inch speaker. It's all about the way that the preamp, the power amp, and the coloration is happening. It's actually,
man.
and a lot of people, the only thing a 15-inch speaker will do that a 10 won't is it will be louder because it has more circumference. But actually, the frequency response of that is not necessarily only because it's a 10-inch or a 15-inch going to be by nature warmer. There's a lot more that goes into it. I've heard some very clanky, bright 15-inch speakers, and I've heard some very deep, warm, and full-bodied 10-inch speakers.
Oh, yeah. And if you match up, I mean, this is getting in the weeds, but if you could match up the area of the circles of the speaker with a group of 410s to like a 115 and find out something that was equivalent, and then, of course, get speakers that have, equivalent like EQ curves, you could make up the difference, because the difference is just the amount of air it's moving. And the problem is that when we're trying to judge things, we almost always like the thing that is louder, not better, but louder than the other version. So when you're truly doing A-Bs, you have to find ways to control for volume so that way you can actually discern the tone difference.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you're listening to this cast and you're not a follower to Laserlight, you owe us. Because I was just thinking about either charging for listening to this cast or at least mandating that you follow Laserlight. Listen, this has been some killer content, guys. You guys just never cease to amaze. I've got all sorts of new, wonderful, invigorating notes based on this cast for the next time. I'm not sure if we're going to keep doing parts 1, 2, 3, or if we're just going to get creative and find some sort of keynote like persnickety or something that ties us in to the next cast, right? Listen, this has been great. I enjoyed it thoroughly. You guys dropped the knowledge big time. Appreciate it. We're going to sign off. Until next time.
This has been Laserlight Presents All About the Gig.